Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Hi, Ange. How are you? I just emailed you. What a great thing. Hi, everybody. My name is Tabitha. I'm the VP of Marketing and External Relations at the Accelerator Center. I'm pleased to welcome you this evening. If those of you in the back want to make your way over to a seat, as you'll see, this whole front row is open. We're a very friendly crew here at the AC, so feel free to join us at the front if you can't find a seat at the back. I'm excited to welcome you. Hi, Jen. This is great. I love seeing all of you. It's a pleasure to have you here at She Talks Tech. This is one of our favorite events in our series of many events that we run. We love talking about the tech ecosystem, about equity, about having a diverse and inclusive community. So we're excited to welcome you here tonight to talk about a very important and timely topic, which is pay transparency and pay equity in the tech space, but also in all spaces, because we believe that that is very important. Quick show of hands, who here, this is your first She Talks Tech event? Yes, we love to see that. We also like to know who's in the room because we work with a variety of different stakeholders in the community. Quick hands up if you're an entrepreneur, you're a founder of a business. A few of you. Folks who work at a tech company. All right, some of the rest of you, folks who work at community organizations, not-for-profits. Good, good. I love to see that personally. Anybody willing to put your hand up because you fall in an other category and you really want to tell us who you are? Oh, I see some hands up. Who wants to tell me who are you? Because I really love to know. Oh, you put your hand up on the spot. Welcome, other service providers, people who work with tech companies. That's pretty much the rest of you. That's perfect. Wonderful. Well, thank you for joining us, whoever you are this evening. We are very excited to have you. I'd like to take a couple moments to say a few quick thank yous. So first of all, thank you to the good folks at Catalyst Commons for hosting this event and all of our She Talks Tech events. It's a really amazing space, and we are always excited to welcome people into our home in Waterloo, but also to get out of our home and into the community. And they very generously let us use this amazing space. We also have a number of really incredible sponsors this evening. Artemis, well, you'll meet Christina just shortly here, is a great partner of the AC. They provide great support to our entrepreneurs. The good folks from Gowling's WLG have provided the amazing little charcuterie cups and drinks that you're enjoying this evening. You'll meet some folks from Gowling this evening as well. And then finally, I'm really excited to introduce you to Sarah, who's going to tell us a little bit about BMO. BMO is our session sponsor this evening. They do great work with our partners as well. So Sarah, I will welcome you to say a few words.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Mason. Can you hear me okay? From Bank of Montreal Private Wealth, and it's a pleasure to be introducing your panelists and your speaker today. So, of course, we're here to talk about equal pay in the workforce. I work for the private wealth division that manages all the money you'll make when you negotiate for your pay raise. So I look forward to seeing you in my office. But in all honesty, I mean, we've been discussing as women for decades about equal pay, fairness in the workplace, et cetera, et cetera. And I think sometimes it's really helpful to be reminded of why we want those things. It's difficult to go and ask for more and demand more. But really, I always say to my clients, wealth affords choice. It's choices of paying your home off, buying a home, living in a better school district, sending your kids to nicer vacations, retiring early. Choices, choices, choices that I encourage all of my clients to go and take advantage of from their employer, whether they're negotiating for more, maximizing their RSP contribution plans through their employer, taking advantage of every conceivable benefit. And then when you do have more, come and see us at BMO Private Wealth, and we'll help to maximize it for you. So with that, I look forward to introducing you to Christina, and I have a very exciting bio. Christina McDougall is the founder and managing partner of Armitage Canada, a tech-focused executive search firm that was started in Waterloo 11 years ago. Armitage team connects Canada's top growth stage tech companies with leaders who are an ideal match for both their growth stage and culture. Christina has spent 25 years working with tech founders and leaders, providing advice and solutions to build companies and careers. Christina is an active angel investor and an engaged member of the Waterloo tech community. Very good. Enjoy tonight's presentation.
Thank you. I don't think I need one of those. So my mic is, I'm good. I was feeling a little Beyonce. That's I won't sing. So happy to be here and to be welcoming a panel of some pretty smart ladies up to join me to talk about something that I think is really important, obviously, to everyone here, but just to the community at large, and I think to tech companies in general. So first, I'm going to invite Devi Prasad. Devi is, I need my glasses because there we go, is a leader that we've had the lovely opportunity to work with. She's currently the VP of People and Culture at Root, a local scaling tech company. Devi relocated back to Waterloo after working for a tech company in California. So she's got some great experience leading and supporting teams in different communities and different countries. Devi has a proven track record combining business acumen with human capital insight to build high-performing cultures that support all stages of organizational growth, from startup to Fortune 500. She is skilled at designing industry competitive strategies that attract, develop, and retain top talent, and is a trusted C-suite business partner who provides on-point vision and counsel needed to steer organizations through growth and to turn around underperforming divisions. So I'm excited to hear what you have to say. Next, I'd like to welcome Rebecca Graham. So Rebecca is a partner with Bright Iron, an advisory firm that provides fractional HR and finance leadership to support tech companies through their growth from startup through scale. Rebecca brings a unique perspective on the people function gained from having worked in startups where there was no HR infrastructure and building it from the ground up. And these are likely companies that you know, TextNow, MyoVision. Clearly that foundational HR work was very well done in those early days and served them well, because those are lovely and successful companies. And then she went on to work for BlackBerry for 9 years, which, as you know, is a large global organization that's gone through a significant transformation since its smartphone days. At BlackBerry, Rebecca supported a number of senior execs and led global talent development, onboarding, performance, communications, DEI, employer rewards, and philanthropy. So lots of rich experience to share with us all today. And then you may, I will let you know, if you saw the lineup for today, we've had a last minute switcheroo. So Amrita, who was going to be joining us, is under the weather. So our last minute call up, which I'm very excited about, is Nina Gupta. So Nina is a partner at Gowling, leading a practice focusing on a broad range of employment and human rights matters. Known for being practical, focused, cost-effective, and I'm also adding quite funny because I've heard Nina speak before, so I'm setting expectations high. Nina advises a range of employers from startup through big multinationals on all things employment law. She's also very involved in the local community and a range of industry associations that are shaping both the HR profession and the law. So happy to have everybody here. And, I thought that the best way to kick this off was to just define what it is that we're talking about. And I think some good points made around pay transparency, pay equity, why that's important to everyone here. But there's a question of pay transparency as law and pay transparency as philosophy. And I think we're going to talk about both of those things, or the spectrum of those things today. But maybe as a place to start, I'll start with you, Nina, because you've had all of maybe 2 hours to prep to be here tonight. And we're good? I'm going to test.
Hello.
Nope. There we go.
That seems more promising.
So from a legal perspective, what is pay transparency and why should we care?
Okay, so I'm going to talk about 3 things just because I often hear them in the same paragraph. So one is equal pay, and especially if you do any work in the States, you hear about equal pay. Equal pay is the basic idea that men and women should be paid equally for the same work. Now, right? And so an example would be, if you have people who are cleaners and you call the cleaners are mostly men and the chambermaids are mostly women and they're doing the same work, you can't have 2 different rates, although that was often done in the bad old days. Secondly, pay equity is almost, I would say, a more Canadian concept, which is it should be equal pay for work of equal value, even if it's very different. The concept would be something like you've got a police officer and a nurse, and they're both employed by the city. You could actually compare those two jobs. And often what would happen in large organizations is women would work in female ghettos, nursing being one of them, teaching being another one, secretarial and admin. And because you were in a female ghetto, you were automatically penalized, even though the work you do is fairly important. One of my friends compares, do you find it odd that babysitters get paid less than dog sitters? And that would be a very good question to ask. It's very technical. I will tell you, you need a compensation expert to really help you. Pay transparency, the third leg of the stool. There's a lot of research, I'm not going to go into it, which talks about if you know something, knowledge is power. What do most employers say? They want you to keep your pay discussions confidential. And that makes it very hard for people who are not in the in-group to know whether or not they're being paid fairly, whether or not they have a good argument, perhaps for a larger bonus, perhaps for a promotion, perhaps for moving up the grid. So pay transparency is a concept of sunlight is a great disinfectant. Sunlight helps reduce discriminatory practices. And though pay equity is law, or pay transparency is law, and I'm not going to give a whole slide deck, because I got told at 10 to 3, I was on deck, so I didn't have time to do that. But pay transparency, and there's legislation in BC, there is legislation in Ontario. If we have time, I can just do a brief update, but I won't do it, is the idea that legislatively you have obligations of transparency right from the job advertisement onward. So we can talk about later on what impact that really has on recruitment, retention, et cetera. Does that help? Does that answer your question?
I think that if everyone's good with sort of a high level, at least understanding of what that philosophy looks like. So I'm curious for everyone on the panel, can you share a personal or professional experience where pay transparency, or maybe the lack of pay transparency, significantly impacted your career or the company that you were at? Do you want to get started, Debbie? Sure.
Can you guys hear me? Yep. Okay. So as mentioned, I was living in California. So moving between countries is always a challenge when it comes to pay transparency, because they're two different ball games when it comes to comp. And I was in a situation the first time I moved to California, I was on a visa. They closed our Bay Area office. And when you're on a visa in the United States, you may have heard this, you have 60 days to find a job. And my situation, it was before Christmas. This is in 2018. And I had an offer at Christmas time. I had gone through the process of telling them this is what I need for my visa. And in the United States, they have what's called a prevailing wage, where the government essentially tells you that you have to pay this person a minimum amount of money. Because if you're bringing someone in from a foreign country to do something, you're not just going to pay them the bare minimum because they're an immigrant. You have to pay them a prevailing wage in order to satisfy, because you have to advertise the job. You actually have to put up the salary advertise it at the organization and what have you not. And so despite me actually showing that data legally, as well as showing the comp data on what a VP of HR was going to be making, they still didn't come to the table with what I needed. And I actually really, really wanted the job. And if I was in Canada, I'd probably take a chance on it. But living in the Bay Area, I just legally couldn't. And so it was disappointing to me how that had happened. And so I'll just tell another quick story that this happened to me again. A lot of startups come and go. And another startup 2 years, I think maybe it's 3 years ago, in 2022, as everyone knows with COVID, a lot of offices were closing. My company decided to once again close the San Francisco office. I lost my job. I was pregnant. I learned my lessons from the last time that it happened, so I called Artemis. And here I am back in Canada because it was virtually going to be impossible. I was very straight up. I interviewed with a lot of people in the Bay Area, and I cut to the chase right away about my comp. This is what I need, and whether they advertise or not, just for me, it was like I just didn't have time to waste because everyone's going to obviously even see that I was pregnant in interviews. It was a very stressful time. So for me, I think pay transparency goes a long way in a lot of different things. So those are just two examples that I'll just share personally.
Awesome. Rebecca?
So being in HR is a really interesting vantage point because pay transparency has been around since I started my job. I see what everybody makes. I see what my peers make. You see what the CEO makes. And so it's an interesting vantage point to see how do they stack up your salary against the others. And so I could tell you stories about all the different roles that I've been in and tell you all the different like the differences between what I made and what other people made. And I think, as we'll probably talk about, there's a lot around qualifications and like how do you compare one job, as Nina was saying, like how do you compare one job to the next and what criteria do you utilize to evaluate that? And so for me, and for anybody who's in HR, I know there's a couple folks in the room, you've probably been frustrated after seeing your colleagues pay, and you're probably frustrated about seeing what people above you make and what the difference is and how much work you do compared to what they do and how are you really valued. So I would say HR is an interesting vantage point.
So I want to give you a professional example. Some of the larger companies, as you know, have to do pay equity plans, and they get an external consultant. And I'm always shocked. It's often HR, which is often female-dominated, which is grossly underpaid. And of course, I then get consulted by usually the male CFO. So, well, there's got to be a fix. I'm going, no. Well, my job's more technical. And then you reel off all the technical things that HR has to understand: employment law, occupational health and safety, immigration, and then all the psychology and all the people skills. And you start thinking, maybe it's not so easy to be an HR manager, but it's often HR that is grossly underpaid in pay equity plans. Where I've seen the difference is actually in a positive way, and I just want to give a shout out to my firm. We became much more transparent about pay, about bonus criteria, about what you need to be to become a partner, what's expected financially. Before it was sort of, we'll tell you when you're ready. Now the discussion is occurring much sooner. That allows people who do not have traditional informal sources of information, like a strong mentor or mommy and daddy in the legal profession, to really understand whether they're making it, whether they're properly being benchmarked, is their salary competitive in comparison to their peers, and is partnership something that they really want to do? And I've seen a really positive impact on people who were traditionally not partners, minorities, women, increasing their ranks in the partnership division because pay transparency has made it very clear. If you want the carrot, this is what you have to do. So it works. It's a little scary, but it works.
Awesome. So when you're looking to advocate for pay transparency in an organization that you're in, and I'll ask this to Rebecca and Debbie, what are the common objections? So whether it's the CFO or the leaders or people in the organization, what's the downside?
I can go first. Yeah, sure. I think I don't know if this is on. Can you hear me okay? Oh, there we go. I think the hard thing is getting people's heads around transparency. And transparency in itself isn't scary. It's the data behind the transparency that's scary. So they know that over time they've made decisions, and those decisions are never really caught up to them until the veil gets lifted. And now all of a sudden everybody sees all the decisions that you've made, and now you have to justify why you made them. You never had to justify that before. California recently went through, well, I guess not that recently, probably 2 years ago? Last year feels like a long time ago, but went through pay transparency, and I can tell you. 2 years ago, sorry. Okay, all right. And so I think it was a really interesting exercise because to Nina's point, when you do, there's pay equity and there's certain requirements that are, that exist here in Canada, and the States, a little different. But what ended up happening is before the veil got lifted, there was a whole bunch of changes that needed to be made, because as soon as someone starts asking questions, you want to be able to demonstrate that there is pay equity across, men, women, and then different roles as well. And so there's a lot of prep work that needs to happen before transparency can happen, because if you just lifted it today, unfortunately, you would find a lot of issues, and people are scared of airing those issues. Oftentimes, people's performance is dictated based on their qualifications, their experience, their skills, and having conversations with people about how your skills are valued and how your experience is valued compared to the next person is a very difficult conversation for a manager to have. And we often see people, like from a performance perspective, leaders shirk having actual conversations about people and their skills and what they need to get to the next level. And they just sort of fast track and talk about all the great things they do, and those people think they should be making a lot more money. And so then now what's going to happen is you have a situation where everybody's going to know, or will likely know, what people are making. And managers are going to have to be accountable, and leaders are going to have to be accountable for the decisions they've made around hiring and compensation.
Yeah, and just to build on that, as I was sharing my example where I had to have my salary advertised like a few years ago, I remember one of the executives came to me, they're like, why is your salary posted? So this is just a few years ago, and how things have evolved where you need to be more open with it. I think Hollywood did a big thing with pay equity as well for women in Hollywood, so that got a lot of attention for women from that perspective. The challenges that you have is that there are people that, you don't talk about certain things. Compensation is one of those things that you don't talk about. I will say I can be a little bit old school as well. So when this concept came up, it's like, we really have to do our homework ahead of time. And it starts with really looking at the current data that you have before you go out and advertise. And then when you do open up an advertisement for a job, is really making sure that you've got the budget to pay for what the market's paying, I think is another thing, because you're either then gonna lose candidates because you're not advertising a salary range that they want to work with. It is a good thing to weed people out from that perspective as well, but also then level sets for people that want to work within it, in a pay equity perspective. And Nina, you mentioned even about dog walkers making more than people that work in a daycare. I've actually advocated with our MPP here locally, a couple of them, to talk about that. For my sister works with early childhood education for 20 years, and she really she's gonna kill me for saying this. She works 3 part-time jobs, because that's the reality of it. And these are so there's just so many different things when it comes to pay transparency that you get pushback at the government level and internally in an organization as well. I gave my executive team a heads up on Tuesday that I was coming to this and that we need to do this in a year. So I still have my homework to do within my organization, but very mindful of it, and really educating. People didn't really bat an eye when I did share that. I had actually shared with my CEO previously that, when we advertise jobs across Canada, BC does have pay transparency, so we're supposed to be doing that. So it's a lot of baby steps. So then we started to say, Ontario remote, not BC. So because we weren't ready for it, because there's a whole bunch of communication that has to happen internally with employees when you are doing salary increases, letting them know from a total compensation where they stand, where their comp ratio is. There's a lot of little things that go on behind the scenes. So managers are concerned about it, I will say, and I think the government's also concerned about it too.
You can tell that the government is concerned about it because they've been very careful about who it applies to. Employers with less than 25 employees in Ontario will not have to do it. And if the expected compensation is over 200,000, or if the expected range ends over 200,000, you're not required to post. So there was obviously some political pressure on that. And the range can be as wide as $50,000. So I'm sitting here looking at a job for, let's say, an entry-level software developer. 50 to 100,000 is a big range. So I'm not exactly, I didn't think that was exactly the right thing to do, but I'm not in government, don't want to be in government. For smaller startups, pay transparency is going to be a real challenge, because what's going to happen is you're going to publish a scale that is less than your big competitors. And some of the great things that come with being with one of your startup companies, flexibility, the potential perhaps for equity, the ability to do more work, more interesting work at an earlier stage in your career, the ability to work directly with C-suite and senior managers, all of those, what I will call unwritten advantages, the flexibility, the competitiveness of being with a small company, that's hard to put all in an ad. So those of you who are recruiting, I'm looking at you, for smaller growth companies are going to find pay equity to actually pose some real challenges, because somebody's going to say, well, big company is paying $125,000 to $175,000 for this, and you're not in that range. And you're going to be on the defensive. You're going to have to justify why these others, perhaps inchoate advantages, really are worth that, $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 potential pay gap.
I just wanted to say that the 200,000 is going to be a real kick in the teeth probably for a lot of female executives as well, because those salary ranges won't be posted. You'll have no idea as a female executive how you stack up against your male counterparts, and it's already been difficult to get to the executive level as a woman. But now, if that's not advertised, unless you're in HR, you won't have a concept until maybe somebody is transparent with you, how you'll stack up against your male counterpart. So I think recruiters will have an important job of advocating for female executives with that.
Well, I think one thing that we find too is we are often working with founders and leaders in companies that are hiring for a role they've never hired for before. So they're entering into a search for talent that they know what job needs to get done, but they don't understand the market implications of that. So what advice would you give to that founder that says, I actually don't know, I need the market to tell me what I need to pay. Like, I need just people to come and talk to me that are qualified, and they tell me how much money they make, and then I can decide whether I can afford that or not. We're obviously looking at, we need to be entering into those conversations with much more information. How do the founders in the room get that data? How do they know?
I mean, there's a lot of different resources out there, some of them free, some of them are paid. I'd be cautious with the free ones because they're usually employee driven and doesn't necessarily provide a lot of reliable, verifiable data. But there are, like, locally, Tech Edge has been around forever, which I think now they remarketed to Benchmark It or something like that. But they are pretty affordable. I think their bottom package is I feel like I'm advertising for them, but I think their bottom package is like $600-ish or so. Myself, at Bright Iron, we build comp systems for startups pretty much every month. We just kicked off most of our projects for 2025, and almost every single startup has it in their Q1 goals to build a compensation system. And the reason for that is they want to get prepared, they want to get ahead of it. And so we use a variety of different sources of data. A really well-known one is Radford Aon. We use them. We've also used Tech Edge. And we do that because we want to get a good basis for across Canada, not just small startup and local. So a larger one like a Mercer or Radford give you an opportunity to slice and dice the data based on revenue, based on ownership, based on industry. And so it gives you just a larger sample size, and it's all verified. So we use that a lot in terms of, if we have a client that wants to know, hey, we're hiring for this, can you give us a sense of market? So we can give them the 10th percentile, the 70th percentile, the 80th percentile, give them a sense of, what their different points are, which inevitably evolves into a conversation around compensation frameworks and do you have this and do you have that? And do you have a qualification mixture? What do you have? And so we've been building that. And so utilizing paid market data is a great source, but having someone that you can trust to pull that data and point you in the right direction. Most of ours that we build are pretty simplistic upfront. So I'm not going to build you tables for a bunch of countries and cities that you don't need. Instead, we'll look at your demographic and look at like who comprises your organization, how big it is, and where do you want to grow to, and then build it based on that. And the only other thing I'll say is a close partnership with finance is really important, because working with finance to determine what you can afford. So there's the market, and this is like, I want this person who's been at Google or, wherever, and great, this is probably what this person makes. Can you afford that? So working with finance to building your headcount plan, which includes salary data, is also very important.
Absolutely. Well, and I'll drop a little plug in for talking to your favorite recruiter, whoever that might be. We're having lots of conversations. So we see real searches or having real conversations around compensation. We have a bunch of salary data that's free on our site that just is from the work that we do. So
the other source is if you belong to a particular industry, many times your industry organization will have really good data. So the not-for-profit industry, there's some very good resources that are available at very low cost. I used to be on the board of a group called Biotalent Canada that was looking at bioscience, life science industries, and they had really good compensation data. So your industry organization is a really good place to find that data as well. I have to say with your comment, everybody wants the unicorn, but most people have a cart horse budget. So, you've got to be realistic about that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So next question for you, Debbie. So you're a senior people leader. You've seen global, and I think Rebecca as well, you've seen, global organizations where there's an intersection of diverse cultures, gender, all the intersectionality conversation. How can organizations globally balance the cultures and the norms and even the geographies across roles in ways that provide for an equitable workplace?
So this is a really tough one because every country's different, just even between Canada and the US are very different. I've been a business partner for Europe as well, very different there. If you, I actually had one of my employees share with me just that she went through a merger and acquisition and the company that acquired them was from India. And so that's a whole other ball game there too. So it's really like wherever the parent company is, they sort of set the tone as to what you want to have happen, right? And so whether it's the HR leadership or the executive team, it's setting the tone with what you want and where things are going. I think what's happening with like the whole nomad and people are working in different countries, people are able to get jobs that pay American dollars in like here in Canada. Like we've lost employees for that reason, right? So because the world has gone more global, it's like this is the trend that's going to pay transparency. It's like the Pandora's box has been open, and so it's setting the tone wherever that head office is to make sure that you're advocating for it, and you need to have an advocate to do that, right? So that's my suggestion. I think it's a hard one, right? Just having supported Europe, it's just every single country is a different ballgame. When you're dealing with M&As, there's just so many different people have different perceptions. Even within one company that I worked at, we had 3 different types of sales forces that had, one was, so it was in pharmaceuticals, where some are calling on doctors, some are medical device, and everyone was like wondering, why are they getting paid differently than me? Like, so there's just like a whole bunch of education that needs to happen for people to really understand where they stand from that perspective. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to like, are you transparent not only about the dollars, but how you got there? And so, like, whether you're talking about a compensation system or a decision on how you arrived at pay, it's what went into that? How did you determine that was the amount of money that that person should make? How did you determine those salary ranges? And like I was talking about, market competitiveness and like where you're at in terms of the compensation scale, and whether you are Google who's paying 100, 120%, of market, or whether you're somebody who is paying at the 50th percentile, which most people are. And then taking a look at, are you taking that same approach in different geographies? And then you can start to utilize things like compa ratios and whatnot to start to see if you have a level playing field across different compensation or different countries, is another way of approaching it. But yeah, I think the reason why transparency has become a thing is because people don't understand the why. And in the absence of information, people come up with their own stories, and understandings as to why I'm being paid this and why Debbie's being paid something else, but aren't we doing the same job? And so people just want to understand the why. So I think anytime you lay out your sort of compensation framework and why you've made the decisions that you have, that will help and that will support.
And every so often, some of those conspiracy theories are right. So, there's a lot of unconscious bias, particularly for small companies where friends of founders may be effectively on a different compensation plan than people who are not in the friends of founder category, because there's a certain amount of, I will say, idiosyncrasy in the pay transparency practices. Pay transparency demands consistency and discipline. And those are hard things, especially in the founder stuff. And I'll give you an example. 3 founders, really decent, all 3 contributing very much to this small company. And one person has more economic need because they have many children, and the other 2 don't. And so they're in a different state. So they were initially going to say, yeah, the person with more kids, we'll let them have more money because they need more money. That is not a irrational decision, but it's not defensible on a pay equity or a pay transparency perspective. So I then said, look, you can't really do that. If you're going to raise one co-founder and you're on the basis that these 3 people are really, doing different parts of the founding work, but equal, then you have to raise everybody's salary, and maybe the other 2 can essentially loan the net proceeds back to the company. But you cannot just arbitrarily do certain things. And growth companies are really bad for arbitrarily doing things. And then they don't like being told that they can't do that anymore. And so that's part of the cultural change that HR, finance, external consultants have to really set. Look, what you did in the growth phase, you had lots of fun, you could do that, but now you're a grown-up. And when you're a grown-up, you cannot do these things. The law does apply to you, and also market forces apply to you. And you cannot get away with, well, I pay Johnny more because he's a friend of the founder, and I pay Patricia less because I hired her last. That's just not the way to do, comp, and that does happen. Yeah. And all of us, in different ways, have worked on trying to avoid that kind of arbitrariness.
Well, and I think we've seen almost the opposite, where at an early stage, you're scrappy, maybe you've got equity, you've got the story of we're a startup, and maybe it was a different time, and you paid a certain amount. And then what we saw through COVID is that all bets were off, and it's a supply and demand conversation. So when the market is really, really tough, salaries are higher and demand is higher. So it was hard for a lot of organizations because the incremental cost of the new hire was much different than what people had been getting, especially if there hadn't been raises over time and someone's now been with the organization 5 years and they're still making just incrementally more than they were 5 years ago. So I guess around that question, companies are moving real fast. Part of being a successful startup is breaking rules and moving quickly and asking for forgiveness and not permission. What advice do you have for companies in terms of what are those first foundational steps? Like if there's a founder in the room that's like, oh shit, I've got a mess. And thank goodness no one can see it. But assuming that, all the walls in your house are about to become glass, what do you do? What do you recommend?
Well, I can tell you that there's a bunch right now who I'm working with that are in that situation. And so the first thing is to talk about it. So, like what's going on? So get that spreadsheet out, get that report. Let's see what the differences are. And let's figure out a path to get there. Let's figure out what do you want to pay? What is going to be normal? What is going to be your practice? How are you going to determine pay? And so I always say, remove the people from the equation for a minute. Build your framework. Build your framework based on what your business can afford and what you would like to do, how competitive you would like to be. Then apply it. And when you apply it is when you will see all the different deltas that you have. And then you go to finance and you ask them for the big check, because you're going to need that money to true everybody up. But it starts with a framework, it starts with the process, it starts with defining what you can afford as an organization. And I just want to say, in addition to Nina, the one thing that I see a lot, and if I could give like one piece of advice to founders, is be really careful what titles you give away at the beginning. I like to say it's like VPs in diapers sometimes, because we've got these VPs who aren't VPs, but they command VP salaries, and they're not doing the scope of a VP job. The company's 20 people. You're not doing the scope of a VP job. You're not looking after multiple regions, countries, hundreds of people. You've got 4 people maybe, and you. It's a big title, and I know it looks flashy on LinkedIn and on your resume, but everybody knows that that's not a true VP job. And so you shouldn't get paid what a true VP gets paid, and you don't require the experience that most VPs do. So you can't get the VP job when you go to, a corporate organization. And so one piece of advice for founders would be, when you are starting to think about titling and you're thinking about how to scope out a role, know that if you give somebody a VP role, and pay transparency is coming, people are going to see what other VPs are making, and they're going to question why they're not making that amount of money. So it has been a problem already, but it's going to become an even bigger problem as as pay transparency comes into play. Just be careful about what titles you give away. It's also very difficult when you realize that you need someone much more senior than your friend from university, and you actually need a true VP, because now you've already given away that title, and you have to come up with an interesting title for that other person to make, which is really just VP. And now you have to tell your friend that you're taking away the VP job, and it never goes well. So, just be careful about what you give away at the beginning.
And can I say, as a lawyer, like on the exit side, you have somebody who's a title like, executive VP, all right? And you realize, this is a company of like 30 people and maybe a revenue of 2 million, it's not a huge company. Then you get the lawyer's letter saying, well, he was executive VP and he was earning so much, but he doesn't have the right credentials. So you should be paying him 2 years, even though he only worked 2 or 3 months, or 2 or 3 years. So the point is, those inflationary titles can come back to bite you at the end. You're much better having very banal, basic titles, like not sexy titles. What I find is that many small companies give away those titles in lieu of compensation. Well, if you come with me, you can be an executive VP when you're 23. And so it sounds really sexy and important. My son is an executive VP at 23. It sounds really good, especially in the matrimonial ads back home in India, but it's not particularly helpful to the company, right? Like, it costs you a lot later on, because then when the real executive VP comes, or when you have another VP, they're saying, well, he's an idiot. Why am I not getting paid as much as the idiot? It's very problematic. Yeah. I'm being blunt. I'm being blunt. And then when you have to terminate your friend who is executive VP, and no real company will give him an executive VP job because he doesn't have the skills, it becomes your problem. Yeah. So one of the things that you were talking about, global practices, Vivi, and how difficult it is. compensation isn't necessarily just the things we think of on the balance sheet. There's a whole bunch of things that aren't on the balance sheet that essentially also help create comp. Like we have in Canada very generous vacation, paid stat leave policies, which add to the burden. We also, I mean, arguably our healthcare system is also part of the comp. Like we're not paying out of pocket for that, so that's paid for by our tax dollars, so that works in. And we have very generous exit packages, much more generous than usually in Europe or in definitely the United States. All of that becomes a problem when you're trying to be consistent across geographies.
Yeah, absolutely. So I expect that, and you know, at the beginning when we're like kind of identify from what organization that you're coming from and what you do, there's a lot of women and there's a lot of people in the room who are curious about themselves and what does this mean for me, and how can I talk to my company about transparency and equity without it looking like I'm a squeaky whiner and looking for a raise. We know that not just in tech, but across all industries, you know, women tend to ask for raises less and tend to negotiate less on the way in the door. There are certain, you know, cultures that are very good at negotiating and others less so. So that can create systemic changes and differences. So curious what advice you give the individuals in the room around advocating for themselves, but I think even bigger than that, advocating within their organization for transparency. Yeah,
sure. I think it's if you're doing this for yourself, is to really know your worth and be confident. I know that's not always easy for some people, but it's doing your research and having your backup. So talk to people that maybe have similar jobs, maybe not within your organization or outside your organization, because as mentioned, there's different industries, and if you're part of an association, you can get a general sense as to what compensation is. You should also have a general sense, like when you go to have those conversations, are you also looking for a job at the same time, and is it really about the money? Because sometimes a company can't even afford to give you what you might be looking for. So I think you have to know when you go to have that conversation, it's maybe a challenging conversation potentially, because a lot of times managers, they rely on HR to have those conversations too, right? And so I think it's also important, you know, if there is an HR person, that you can build those relationships, because sometimes HR has a different approach than talking to your manager too, right? So I've been through the situation where I did actually talk to a leader about my compensation, and I basically say, do you just want to take my equity back? Because it was just like a whole tax thing because of two countries situation. And then I ended up just talking about compensation, and she told me at the end of it, she's like, I would just like to commend you that not many women would ever do what you just did. And I just basically said, well, I know what I'm worth. I work in HR. I can see it, right? So you know, sometimes you have to utilize the data that's right there in front of you. And so I have coached many, many friends when it comes to like whether it's interviewing for an internal job or interviewing for an external job. And I always go through like a comp question with them, because you kind of are always in negotiations at every step of the game. And I've helped a lot of people when they're in those situations, and then it's a question and it's an art to be able to speak to that. And so I do think if you're also working with a recruitment firm from an external perspective, just be honest with them. They are there to advocate for you. And, you know, oftentimes search firms, yes, they might be loyal to a company, but you're the talent that they're bringing to the table too. So that's from an external and internal. Like there's a couple of different ways to approach it, but I just, you know, from a confidence perspective, is just know what your worth is. So.
I mean, I feel like you said a lot there that's really helpful. I mean, I talk about comp almost every single day. Talking about my own comp is very difficult. trying to compare myself and say like, well, am I worth what that person's worth? I wonder what that person is, they're talking about in terms of salary. I wonder if they get the same amount of equity. I wonder if they get the same amount of, and there's a lot of questions. And I think being bold and confident and asking the question, I mean, they can just say no if they don't want to tell you. But I think if you don't shy away from the conversation and you ask, how was your salary determined, or how did you arrive at that? You know, I think sometimes being in HR, it's difficult because we see everything and it looks like we're using our power of access to information to leverage our own position. But as Nina said, we're often the lowest on the totem pole. So
Maybe you should be doing more of that as a profession.
maybe we should. But yeah, I think I would agree. Like, ask questions, be confident, ask how salaries arrived, you know, pay attention to what's out there when other companies post jobs. But I think if you're an employee too, it's important to think about where's your company at? What stage are they at? Do you think they can afford that? Are you there for a paycheck? Are you there for experience? Are you there for the people? Are you there for the title? Why are you there? Because I know like life is only getting more and more expensive, but you have to be realistic about the industry that you're in, the community that you're in, what you're looking for. And if you're comparing yourself to jobs in Toronto, but you never drive to Toronto, you may need to reset your expectations because that job that's going to pay $250,000 in Toronto is going to require you to go there a couple times a week. Are you prepared to drive there? Are you prepared to take the GO train? Let me tell you, I've done it. I don't like it. And it's not for me. And so I think you need to ask yourself what makes you happy. There will always be someone who makes more than you in your company, in another city. There will always be more. But you have to ask yourself if what you're doing makes you happy. Do you wake up in the morning? Do you enjoy what you do? If so, okay, like, should it be fair? Absolutely. Should there be pay equity? Absolutely. But I think, you know, being in HR, I have a lot of conversations with people around what they make and how they want to make more, and they want to get promoted, and they want to get promoted without having the skills and expertise to do so. So are you having conversations to upskill yourself with your leader and talk about what does it take to get to the next level, or are you just looking for a pay increase? Because I think it's a really important conversation, and employees also, to your point, Nina, don't factor in all the other things that companies spend on, right? So if you're a remote company, does your company give you a stipend for, you know, internet, for your phone, for whatever? What do you get in terms of, like, every time you want to take a day off to go to a conference, or do you have volunteer days? Do you have, how many sick days do you get? How much vacation do you get? What's your benefits package like? There's a lot of things that go into what companies pay for employees that it's really easy to lose sight of. And so there's been like a move to more of like total compensation statements, where it shows you like how much your company's contributing to all the things that all the things that you have. And the reason for that is because they're trying to demonstrate how much they do value you, because they are trying to demonstrate that across the board as fairly as they can. And that happens, those amounts can be across various levels as well. So I don't know. Whenever I have conversations with employees, I'm always like, asking questions. The worst that can happen is you get a no.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, I mean, we talked about titles, and one of the things that's tricky is that the VP in this organization and the VP in this organization can't be compared. Because when you unpack what they actually do in those jobs, they're doing very different jobs. So when you're looking to advocate for yourself, you really have to look at, like, what is that thing that you do, regardless of your title, and what is your contribution, what is the value of that contribution to the company that you're at? Because in some organizations, they will pay you less because they care less about those things. But that's the conversation to have with your leaders, is what do I need to be doing more of, or how can I grow in ways that are the most valuable to you as an organization? Because if I need a manager and a supervisor watching everything I do, I'm a less valuable organization or person to that organization than someone that can just take instruction and then run with it for a week. So I think really understanding beyond title which is a tougher thing, and I think maybe more unique to tech because it's a little bit of, it can be more of a free-for-all, especially in earlier stage organizations. I think I just got the sign that we're like low on time, so I'm looking for the really juicy ones. Maybe looking at innovation. So, what are the things that you've seen companies do? Like, let's tell some stories. Like, what are things that you've seen companies do really well and in an innovative way? And we've talked about total rewards. So I think that that's one. I mean, we've seen companies that don't have a lot of cash, but they've got equity and they've got other things that they can spice it up and give you fun vacations and sabbaticals and work from Brazil, or, if those are things that people value, then wrap that up, around a little number.
One thing that's more on the individual side is you can actually get people like Vivi, like Rebecca, to coach you on your compensation conversation. So especially for women, I'm not saying just women, it's also cultural. One of the best things you can do individually is actually get some practice about talking about money. Like if you grew up in my background, we never talked about money, like never. And it was actually my father, when I started getting older, who essentially kind of gave me the crash course in financial literacy. But it is actually very helpful to understand. And I think just doing your own kind of personal, okay, this is where I'm at, this is what I'm contributing to the company. Do I feel like I'm being fairly compensated? And then having that conversation that that was suggested, what do I need to do within the organization to becoming more valuable? But also considering sometimes getting some career coaching. Maybe it's from somebody like Artemis, but it could be other people who do that to sort of say, look, you can stay in this company, you love this company, you love the people, you love the product. You're not going to get paid the most, but you're really going to have a fun hoot ride about it. That's worth a lot. On the other hand, if you're financially motivated, I'm not trying to shame you, I think that's a perfectly logical motivation, then you're going to have to maybe shift. And then what do you need to do that shift? I happen to be happy where I am, so so there it is. I'm having my comp conversation next week, so I probably shouldn't have said that out loud on the record. But there's a lot, like I could have gone to New York, and I would have been paid more in New York, but the actual work demands in New York are probably twice as much as they are where I am. So those hours, you start saying, well, I'm not so sure it's worth it to me. So I've made those decisions. I'm happy with the decisions I've made. And I think it's worth having it. And if you start feeling unhappy, then I think you really do need to talk to people like Artemis. You need to talk about what you need to do. It may be some upskilling. Sometimes, bluntly speaking, it's how you present yourself, those soft skills. Do you sound authoritative, right? And there's bias, let's be blunt, because we're conditioned to think men are more authoritative. But how do you present yourself more authoritatively? How do you have those questions about compensation and don't feel squirmy inside? We need to train ourselves. We need to get it over. Because when your contractor says your kitchen is going to be this much, he's not squirming about that. When guys ask for, more money, and they don't get it, it's like, okay, let's go for beers. It's, I tried. Like, we've just, as women, since it's a She Talks seminar, I'm just telling you what I tell my, associates and colleagues. It's okay to essentially be told, no, we're where I think we can pay you. What's not okay is for you to not have the conversation. Yeah. Right?
So I'm gonna just pull on one of those threads. So you talked about unconscious bias, and I've heard conversations where someone is talking about what they can get away with paying somebody because they have a spouse that has a really good job, or because they don't have children, or what they need to pay somebody because they have requirements financially, and those things don't have anything to do with the job, their performance in the job, any of those things. Where is unconscious bias? Where does it show up? I mean, I guess we could welcome to the next, 2 hours of conversation if we wanted to really unpack that. But maybe just a quick word of advice for the managers and leaders in this room around
Women's
unconscious
work
bias?
is undervalued. So, all those things that make a workplace fun, the Christmas parties, the signing the nice cards when people are going off on mat leave, the arranging for flowers when somebody's in the hospital, those are really important things from an HR teamwork perspective, and they are not valued from a financial perspective. So if you're getting stuck doing that, you push back and you make Johnny do it. And if Johnny screws up, you tell your boss that Johnny screwed up. Too bad, it's not my problem, because you are not going to get paid for that. You might want to do it because you're a nice person. Go for it, but it's not compensated. And yet when you think about, team engagement is the most important thing, and I'm going, okay, how much are you going to pay for that, right? If it's the most important thing. Secondly, just for fun, look up on YouTube Kristen Pressner, who is the global head of human resources in Roche Pharmaceuticals. Hopefully I pronounced that right. Phenomenal presentation of unconscious bias. And she says, I am biased against women, and I'm a woman leader, and I never thought I would say that. And that's how she starts. So females, we just don't pay them enough. And I think there's also a capitalist mentality that says, it's okay to do that. If I can get you to do the job for 80% less than I can get her to do it, woo, good deal. But the problem is it's really unfair. And so we have to get away from it's just a contract negotiation, and if I can get you cheaper than I can get him, well, I'm going to hire you because that's how we do things. And from an understanding, we're trying to build fair and equitable systems that are scalable. And unfair systems are really hard to scale and maintain.
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I think a couple areas that like unconscious bias kicks in is typically experience from outside of Canada. That one often comes up, that the work that they were doing wherever they were before is not valued. I would say if it's in the US and Canada, not as much of an issue. Internationally, absolutely. And so that's undervalued. Just talking about quickly unconscious bias. I think women, absolutely. And part of it is because if you have children, it's assumed that you have spent less time in the workforce, you have less experience to offer. I don't know many women who have been off on mat leave who haven't contributed to their career in some way, shape, or form over that period of time. And so, continue to stay involved in the community, continue to stay involved in their network, keeping tabs on their email while they're off, even though they're not required to, joining the odd meeting. And there's value in that. And there's also value in being a parent as well. So I would say those two come up a lot in terms of like years of experience with women, and then years of experience internationally, and whether that's valued in Canada.
Yeah, I'd say those are the two big things as far as gender and cultural biases. I think there's also, people may have affinity biases as well. Like, I'm a proud University of Waterloo alumni, so whenever I see one of those resumes, I like jump on that. And other people are the same thing, right? So it's like it's one of those things that you have to know. Like if you see someone that you feel an affinity towards, you're likely going to give them a better salary. That's an unconscious bias that happens. And so I think it's really important for anyone in here that's from an HR side, when you're a business partner and partnering with executives on making these decisions, you have to be also very comfortable in calling it out, right? So calling it out when there's turnover with women, when calling it out when, their salary is significantly lower than the male counterpart, calling it out when you want to do a round of layoffs, and like looking at, not just like female, but also like from a diversity perspective too. So there's all of those different factors that go into every part of that. There is a lot of unconscious bias. And so I think one of the things to do with that is do unconscious bias training. And whenever you're doing a comp review cycle, is to actually remind people about that when you're doing performance reviews, to remind people about unconscious biases. So if some organizations have calibration processes, so to remind people about those types of things that come up.
Yeah.
So
Sorry, Christina, I just thought there are unconscious bias tests online that you can take. And I think it starts with you. So understanding what your own unconscious bias are, and then ask other people to do the same. And when you're in a circle making decisions, make sure you know about each other's unconscious bias. It can be very uncomfortable to admit the ones that you have, but I think it ultimately arrives at the best decision. Totally agree on calibration sessions as well. But if those people you're collaborating with are in a position where they understand, where your blind spots are and you know where theirs are, again, you can arrive at the best decision.
Well, and I think that, I've heard through the conversation lots of themes, and, I think the idea of transparency requires honest conversations and honesty with yourself, honesty with your team, like really understanding and finding ways to defend, like to make sure that all of your decisions are defensible, because you have to assume that if they're secret today, they won't always be secret. So that requires a different level of courage, and so courage in leaders and courage in individuals, and probably some management training, because there are going to be situations where software engineer A is orders of magnitude better than software developer B, but you need them both on the team, and there's a real good reason why they're not paid the same, but you have to be ready to have that conversation, and it's like hella uncomfortable if you can't, if you can get away with it. I think a lot of leaders just would prefer not. So I think that we're running on time. We're going to do some Q&A. So if anybody has a question for anyone on the panel, there's a super fun little microphone box that I don't think we can throw it, but we can pass it. We can throw it. So make sure you're good at catching before you put your hand up. But does anyone have a question or a comment? Ruth?
Hi, just as for clarification, talking about having to post salary ranges, that's just salary. That's not any other comp like bonuses or things like that?
Well, no, bonuses do go into comp, so you essentially would be expected
like a total
reward. But it's not going into benefits, it's not going into ESOPs. But for smaller companies, they may want to post that because their base salary may not be as attractive. So you may want to actually post more information. We'll know more shortly. It won't apply to companies under 25 employees in Ontario, and we will know more as they start posting more regs.
Yeah, like right now, mainly people are posting salaries and there's some people who are posting even though they're not hiring in BC, but I think people who are hiring across Canada or who are open to hiring across Canada are posting the salary range because BC is included, obviously. So.
Yeah. Nope, another question. Oh. Oh, it's light. Okay.
Hi, my question is, every role that I've ever worked in, there's usually transparency on a salary band, but those bands are gigantic often. So I'm curious, when you're speaking with that employer and maybe negotiating your salary at a new job, what sort of factors are they taking in about you to decide where you fall in the range? Or is that attached to just where the starting is for a new employee? So are they thinking about you or thinking about where a new employee stands?
Mm-hmm. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with the actual legislation when it comes out, because right now it's very, very vague, and it just says you got to post compensation. It doesn't say what you have to post and whether it's the full range. Because some companies will post the hiring range, which is typically the min to the midpoint and not the midpoint to the max. And of course, there's situations where people go over the max. But anyways, and so somebody at the midpoint is typically performing. And then depending on where someone's at in the level, obviously more experienced people are going to go higher on that range. I think you answered your own question by saying what went into this decision? How did you determine where I am plotted on this compensation range? So if you know the compensation range is between, say the hiring range is from 80 to 90 or 80 to 95 or something like that, and you get a 90 offer, ask them why. ask them to explain to you, how that fits into their compensation model. Again, I think with pay transparency, we'll see a lot more transparency around the structure of compensation and how decisions are reached. But right now, because there's so much gray with what has been shared as requirements, it's a hard answer to give because we won't know until people are required. And I can guarantee that people are only going to do what they're required to do, not what they should do. But I think from your part as a candidate, you can ask, is this the hiring range or is this the entire compensation range? And you can ask how they determined your pay relative to the range they posted.
And the best time to do it is before you accept their offer. Like, that's the other thing. Women don't negotiate their offers, so negotiate your offer. Make sure that if you've got really good experience, like you're the unicorn and they really want you, well, are they giving you unicorn credits when they're looking at where they're going to benchmark it? There's tons of stuff when you want to waste time on Reddit or Glass Ceiling where people offer a range and then your offer is way lower because they sense you're desperate and really want the job. So they thought, well, we'll talk about your increases later. This is the range we discussed in the interview. If there's a reason why the offer came in less than the range we discussed at the interview, I want to know about it because it's sort of the old adage. If they're treating you so badly in the courtship phase, how well are they going to treat you when you're married to them? So, I'm a real believer in negotiating harder at the beginning stage, and that's something that women in particular, minorities, people from different countries, are much less likely to do.
Yeah, the taboo around talking about money, like it's not in polite conversation. Like I'm not going to ask everyone to put their hand up around what their salary range is. But I could say tell me what color car you drive, or how big is your house, but the taboo becomes less and less as you get more senior. So I know most of the conversations we're having are with people at the executive level, and it's a pretty easy conversation. What kind of salary do you make? This is what I have. This is what I make. This is what I'm expecting to make. This is the range. No apologies. That confidence is something that we see at the senior level, and I think that that's something that as you're getting there, building that kind of boldness up. I've heard so many stories of people that don't know what the range is until they get the offer. How much time did you invest in an interview process going through this whole courtship without ever talking about numbers? You wouldn't take a car for 10 test drives without knowing what the sticker price was. So, I think ask the question, and if you're not sure how to ask the question, get some coaching on where in the interview process do I bring up compensation, and how do I answer the question around,
Oh, and by the way, very shortly, you're not in Ontario, not going to be able to ask what a person's current or past compensation is, because number one tactic was, oh, well, she's only earning $52,000 at ABC Co. So if we give her an offer at 57 or 58, which is at the low, maybe even below the range, she might bite at it because it would.
You can ask for their desired salary for the position.
Yes, well,
Just not what their current
salary is. So, and it's very, okay, well, I'm going to put a question. Maybe I'm not allowed to. What is the desired salary? Well, I'm willing, I think the answer should be, I'm willing to be fair, but I want to make sure that I'm put appropriately in the range that you have for this position. What is the range that you have determined for this position? And how much credit are you going to give for the fact that for 5 years, I've been doing this job with stellar reviews at ABC Co., or I graduated at the top of my class, or I'm really good at this thing, and this has been my hobby and my passion for the last 10 years. How are you going to rate all of that?
Yeah.
The other thing I was going to mention, and I forgot, is try to suss out how many other people are in a similar level position as the one you're going for, and say are there any comparators, at this level, and what is the pay? What is this offer relative to them and their pay? You can start to have a conversation around that, so that when you come in house, you know who, or if you want to look them up and figure out who they are, you can determine how much experience they have. You can start to do some recon on your own.
All right. Any other questions? No? All right. Awesome.
I'm glad I got my question in there. Thank you, everyone. My name is Ruth Castle, and I'm the CEO at the Accelerator Center, for any of those that I haven't met yet. So I'm here to close off our event today. It's been an incredible opportunity to engage with all of you. I personally learned a lot, and pay transparency has been an important part of my career for sure. Short story, I worked on a team of about 10 men. I was the only woman on the team. I was up for a promotion. My boss came in saying that I was being offered a promotion. That's great. I said, don't even tell me what you're offering me. I just want to know that I'm getting paid the same as the rest of my peers. And they came back with a 12% increase from what they had planned to offer me. So, it's worth the conversation, definitely. So I wanted to say thank you very much to Bank of Montreal, to Artemis, and to Gowling WLG for being our sponsors for tonight. If we could just get a round of applause, please, for that. It is definitely going to be interesting over the next year to see how these conversations all work out. And I think pay equity has been a passion area of mine for a long time, and I hope all women leaders, and then I was going to say all leaders. I hope that's important to all of you. I have a lot of notes I'm supposed to read. Just a second, just make sure we're getting through them all. At the AC, we work with early stage founders and helping to integrate some of these learnings and policies as they are growing their businesses is certainly very important to us. We are focused on supporting underrepresented groups, and we actually have just launched a special cohort of our AC Incubate program, which we're calling Incubate Plus. Look at that. That's pretty cool, eh? Where we are supporting women and gender diverse founders. So if you know anybody in that category, please have them come and apply to the program. It is paid for by the Women in Gender Equity Canada, or Wage Canada. And so we are very excited to be working with a new group of entrepreneurs. You can stay connected to all of our events by subscribing to our community newsletter at the bottom of our website, which is acceleratorcenter.com. So please sign up so you know what's going on. I am doing a personal plug. So Monday, if anybody does or doesn't know, Monday is Blue Monday. It's considered the most depressing day of the year, third Monday in January. And so we have decided to, instead of doing the most depressing day of the year, we are hosting a Battle of the Bands Tech Edition on Monday night at Maxwell's. We have 6 local bands that are competing for bragging rights, and it's going to be a fantastic time. I am one of those bands, so just anybody. Yeah. It will be my second time performing in public ever. So, what could go wrong? Anyway, if you'd like to come, please do. All the proceeds from this event, the net proceeds are going to the Canadian Mental Health Association. What you may or may not know is that according to a survey reported by Forbes a couple of years ago, 72% of entrepreneurs say that their mental health has been impacted by being an entrepreneur. 36% of those struggle with anxiety, and then even specifically more for women, because that's part of the thing we're talking about tonight. We say the report said 66% of them report stress related to their work, and 36% of them report depression based on being an entrepreneur. Doesn't that sound fun to be an entrepreneur? Everyone in the room who's a founder. I have been there, I have done it. There's a lot of work, but it's definitely worth it. And there are community supports to help you as you're going through your journey through the Accelerator Center. We have a bunch of folks from Communitech here. There are lots of supports for whole health of founders. So yes, Battle of the Bands proceeds are going to the Canadian Mental Health Association of Waterloo Wellington. So we certainly encourage you to join us. It'll be a great night. I think it is a high of minus 16 degrees on that day. So you don't want to be outside, and you don't want to be inside because you might have to watch the inauguration in the US. So come to my event instead. So, all right, that's my pitch. Thank you, everyone. It is great to have you here. Thank you to our panelists. April is our next She Talks Tech event. We'll be talking about tech, specifically supporting women's health. So women's health tech. So that will be interesting, and I look forward to it, and I look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you.